leave it there.
Okay. So you basically say we modified this entry.
Yep, but let's delete all that code and do something better. So we'll go bikes, just call update. Now it looks way better, right? Go and update this bike.
And how does it figure out from that instance?
By default, it just attaches this thing as modified. So it's going to do an update for all the properties. This is the easiest pattern to do in MVC.
And it knows because of the bike's ID.
No, I'm telling it it's existing. So if it had an ID of 0, then if I wanted to do that where I look at the ID and work it out, then I would call add if it had an ID of 0, or update, which is attached as modified, if it didn't. But remember here we're in a method called edit, so it's editing an existing bike. So I'm happy just to assume.
Forgive my ignorance, but
go for it.
That's very clean, and that's like the simplest. Like that's very easy to teach.
Mm-hmm.
But when you say bikes.update and you pass in a bike, it knows that is the bike, a specific bike, because of its primary key.
Yes. So it's going to issue an update statement for that. Now, so I would say this bike has an ID of 4, say, so it's going to do an update bike set blah equals blah, where ID equals 4.
All right, cool.
Now there's obviously better patterns you could do here. You could query and change so we only update the columns that are actually updated. We could do something like e-tags.
Yeah, it could be more sophisticated.
Yeah, but
it's going to do a complete all fields update.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, good for basic CRUD, and certainly good for learning.
Yeah, absolutely, and good for scaffolder templates. It's pretty easy, and I can add in extra logic if I want. So now that we've got this written, let's just run and make sure it actually works.
Yeah, before, like everyone does examples of get, but getting edit and new, clean and simple and right is so important.
So while we're on that topic, before we go look at it, this API is not in this build. I think it just got checked in yesterday, but we are going to have an API.
I like that you just changed direction completely.
Yeah.
That's good.
We'll see it working.
No, I like it. Please do.
So we're going to have something like this, attach graph. So update, add, etc. work really well when I have one object, but they don't work super great when I have like one root of an object that has a whole other.
Then you're all in trouble.
I'm attaching an order, it has order lines and products and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Or if you have like some kind of enum that's a lookup table and
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So attach graph is kind of exactly what we just talked about. So I give it a root, and it's going to go and look at everything that it can reach from that object based on the metadata it has. And it's going to go through, and this overload is going to see if it has a primary key set. So if they're integer primary keys, if the ID is anything other than 0, it will attach it. And if the ID is 0, it will mark it as added. So it's like a very simplistic way.
And it's going to do this without calling a bunch of SQL commands?
Exactly. It'll just kind of...
It's all in memory.
This is kind of what a lot of people wrote the hard way by default. And then the other option I have, if my logic's a bit more complicated than that, I can register a fancy little lambda here and say, and this gives me the state entry for the thing that it's about to attach. So I could set the state, I can tell it which properties are modified, I can tell it to skip this object, like don't attach this at all. So this is good if I want to get a bit more advanced.
Interestingly, why is it saying that that's not available on ASP.NET 5?
Oh, it's not available anywhere at the moment. That's interesting. It says it's available for core. It's not, because it doesn't even exist in this build.
Because you just made it up.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, cool.
All right. So when people ask about detached entity scenarios, that's kind of typically what they're asking about. Like, I have a graph, I want to attach it. It was very hard in 6. We now have the building blocks to make it easier in 7.
Nice.
And we have more stuff planned after that. That's just how far we've got so far.
All right. You were still saying something about, at the very beginning, not creating a database by default and how that was freaking people out.
Yes.
You showed it to migrations. Everything you showed so far looks very similar to what we have today.
Yeah, so all we've really done, you could do migrations from the start if you wanted to, or you could, that very first time you ran, you would get that special, like we special case F5 for the first time and we'll bootstrap a bunch of stuff. And then unfortunately later that means when we enable migrations, there's a whole bunch of flaky, scary code that runs to work out that probably want to make it look like you used migrations to create it. So we basically just tore that bit of the product out because it's confusing and it's full of bugs. It's very hard to get stable and working. So the default experience obviously now is to use migrations to create your database.
Got it.
It also nicely differentiates I'm targeting an existing database or I'm creating a database from the model. Creating the database from the model is now explicit. So if you're expecting to write a model and target an existing database, if you accidentally pointed it to the wrong database name or something, EF would be like, oh, that doesn't exist, let me create it for you.
Yeah, and it would be chaos.
Super confusing. So,
Yeah.
All right, so we had our simple form scaffolded out. Obviously, this is very early builder scaffolding. It doesn't. So we'll create, I don't know, bike BB100. That can be big bike, and then we'll create a small bike as well. This one can be a bit cheaper, $99. All right, so everything's working. We have basic data access up and running. And like we said, there's a few differences, but for the most part, it looks and feels very much like EF6.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to pop back to slides for a second, just to flash up our new topic, which is going to dig into some stuff that's actually new in EF7.
There we go.
Now I've hopefully allayed most of everybody's fears. Let's look at some cool new stuff we were able to do.
Let's freak you out now that we've made you feel comfortable.
Well, hopefully what I'm going to demo will actually just make people happy. So,
all right.
Obviously, migrations is a bit of a learning curve there. So if I come to EF and I just write a context, then I might not know that migrations is the thing I want. So one of the cool things we did, and this is exclusively for ASP.NET 5, is we introduced some help pages that when I'm developing locally will actually help me learn about migrations. So, and obviously these are optional things, you don't have to use them, but they just kind of ease the learning curve a bit. So I've introduced a model change. This obviously requires a change in the database as well. I don't have a features column in my table yet. But before we create a migration, let's swap back to IE, and I'll just refresh here. Now, this is going to result in an exception in the database because there is no features column. But you notice I'm getting an error page with a bit more context on it that says, hey, this is a DB context. You have migrations enabled, and there's some pending changes you haven't scaffolded to a migration yet.
So how did you do this? This is a piece of middleware?
This is a piece of middleware, and it also uses logging. So logging's great for writing out text information to a thing, but we also have structured logging now, so we can actually pass state into the logging. So whenever a database exception occurs within EF, it actually writes out structured logging to say, this is the exception, this is the context it occurred on, this is the exception type we got. And so this piece of middleware listens to that and says, oh, well, that context has migrations enabled. I think I can give you a bit more context to help you solve this problem.
And this doesn't go into production. Why? Like,
It could if you really wanted it to.
I don't.
No, obviously. So
how do I keep that out of production?
Along with the standard error page, which gives you a whole bunch of context on errors, we go to startup.cs. You see they're wrapped in this if block that says, if I'm in development, then go ahead, enable browser link, the standard error page, which gives me stat traces and things like that, and also the database error page, which helps me out with migrations.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Now, these two things are separate pieces of middleware at the moment. We are looking at integrating the database error page as kind of a plug-in for the error page, but it works.
That's still pretty cool.
Yep. So let's do what it said. Let's bring back up Package Manager Console.
And again, just to be clear, I want to understand, you're doing this in the Package Manager Console because you like doing it from here.
Yeah, I could just...
You don't have to do this from here.
No, I could do it from standard command.
People should remember that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. It would be interesting, I'm thinking, if you could right-click on that inside of bike.cs, make the gesture in the CS file rather than over in the, like the initial obvious thing to do is to stick it on a right-click somewhere in Solution Explorer. But it seems more like a control dot or a smart tag.
Yeah. Well, we have this new light bulbs feature, right, where things kind of context stuff can pop up.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
This. Yeah.
Cool.
All right, so we added a migration. Now we would...
Even better, I'm sorry, I just had a total brainwave. We can plug in browser link stuff. You could have your error inside of IE there, have the light bulb light up in the browser, and then push the stuff back with browser link.
Hold that thought for a second. So
don't tell me you already did it.
No, not quite. Well,
okay.
This might be.
That was going to totally. I would fall out right here.
So I added a migration. It's sitting here in my project. I should apply it now because this thing's here ready for me to tweak.
Sure.
But let's forget to apply it, even though it told me to here.
Yeah.
Let's just refresh this page. And so it's going to tell me, you got the same exception, but this time it's smarter.
No!
It knows it's here, so I can just say, well,
no!
go and apply it.
How did you do that?
And then I refresh the page. Middleware. Got to be careful because we really don't want to deploy this to production.
No, but that was cool.
Yeah. So
I totally just made that up.
Yeah. So we could do the same thing with add2. We just haven't yet because we have this whole, just edit the file system.
No, but still, that was cool.
Yeah. And now I can just press F5 from the browser and everything's, it all works.
No, I totally just made, that's awesome. Okay, that was cool. All right, you win.
All right, that's the database error page.
Yes, good night, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
That was cool.
Woo! For quick coding.
No, that was impressive, yeah. What else can you do for me?
Yeah. All right, batching. Let's take a quick look at that. So we have price service here. This is just a simple little service class I wrote. It takes an instance of our context. Nothing particularly interesting there. Has this method, basically update the prices. I might say I want to double all my prices, so I pass in a multiplier of 2. It loads all of the data from the database, sets the retail price to 2 times whatever it was, and then calls save.
And it just knows that you changed them all. Change tracking.
Yes. Yeah. So this is typical EF6 behavior.
I know. It's always impressive, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, obviously, this only works because I'm doing it on an instance of the context. If I detach this thing and send it to the browser and then it comes back later,
Right.
I have to do more work.
And I'm still, when I see stuff like this, and I'd like to hear what you have to say, I would still be afraid of whatever SQL this generates.
Yeah, let me just code that up quickly. Right. No, so I will say what this doesn't generate, which would be awesome if we could do this in the future. It would be great to write some kind of link statement that says, instead of like pulling the data back into memory, updating it, and then saving it,
Yep.
let's just write a link thing that says update bytes where set.
Exactly.
And push it
That
in
would
a
be
single
really
statement.
cool.
That would
Yes.
be cool. We don't do that yet. All right. Let's just expose an action on our controller so that we can actually call this service. So I'm just going to use a code snippet. So I'm introducing an action that just says go and double all the prices. Why not? All right, let's just F5 on this one. We'll do the whole recompile in the background thing.
Okay. And when do the prices get doubled?
Okay, so I'm going to call the action now. So double prices. Now, when my action is completed, it does a redirect back to this page.
Sure.
So if we look in on here, we can see everything just doubled. It used to be $199, it's now $398.
Yeah,
It
sure.
used to be $99, it's now $198. All right, so the interesting thing, I've got SQL Server Profiler running here. Historically, if I had 2 bytes in the database, that would have been 2 round trips to the database to update for each one. If I had 100, it would have been 100 round trips.
Right.
Now we batch everything up into a single command. So
And how did you know to do that?
we basically run some heuristics to work out what we can batch together, if that makes sense. Obviously, in this case, it's pretty simple. We're doing update statements. It's pretty safe to send all this stuff in one batch. It gets much more complicated when we have relationships and orders matter.
Sure.
And maybe we've got an identity column and we need to pull back the results.
And you can do this for millions of rows?
Well, there's actually some limits on SQL
You've
Server.
run out of @p number.
Well, we probably won't run out of those, but there are limits to how many,
Yeah.
how big this command can be. So we're intelligent in our SQL Server provider. We know what the limits of SQL Server are, and we try to be intelligent about what we do.
Cool.
All right, so we've got 2 update statements going on here together, which
Right.
is great. You also mentioned what does the SQL look like. So an EF6 never generated a query like this. This is kind of something I might actually write by hand. It's obviously very simple.
Other than the square brackets, it's quite tidy.
Yeah, I guess you probably wouldn't, Alias. We could look at removing that too.
No, it's just, the question is when you have something generating something,
Yeah.
does it need to generate idiomatic something, or does it need to generate as close to idiomatic as would be performant?
Exactly, yeah. It's actually interesting. In EF6, we did some updates to the SQL generation that were purely cosmetic. They had no benefit for improvement.
Really, just to make people feel better.
Yeah, on the simple stuff, you don't want to see select star from, select star from. Now, SQL Server is smart enough to know that that's the same thing, but people freak out when they see it the same. All right. Testing was always difficult with EF. We made it easier in EF 6.1, I think. We kind of opened up dbset. It was no longer sealed. You could just mock dbset directly, but
Yeah, every time someone sees something sealed or internal, they get upset,
Yeah,
as rightfully so.
interestingly, everything in our code base is public at the moment. We're working out ways to differentiate. So we think we're going to use namespaces to differentiate. Like everything's public, but this is something you probably don't want to mess around with unless
So
you really know what you're
.internal as a namespace.
Something like that, yeah.
Don't touch.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're going to try and test the bike service. Now, at the moment, cycle sales context, we kind of hard-coded a whole bunch of stuff in that class to say this connects to this SQL Server instance, this database name, etc. So we're going to look at changing that. So we'll go to the context, just close down a couple of these things. All right, so we want to get rid of this code here and move it somewhere else.
Right.
So I'm going to introduce a constructor. And this thing is going to bring in DB context options, which is basically the settings. And you'll look down here when you see on configuring, this is the thing we're configuring down here.
Right.
But instead, we're going to pass it in from external. And I can also kind of strongly type these to say that these are the options for this particular type of context.
If that context had options that were specific to itself?
Exactly, yeah. This is handy with DI because I don't want to register like 6 different DB context options if I have 6 different context types. I want to register them explicitly for this context.
I think that you want to get rid of that.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Let's just format things a bit too. All right, so now we're going to get rid of this code. I'm just going to copy a little bit of it into the clipboard, and then we'll just delete the rest of it, like so. And then we're going to go to startup.cs because this is where I configure how it's going to work for my MVC application when it's running.
Right.
So let's go up to this bit here. And this, I mentioned this method here can do some extra stuff, so I can basically paste the same code here and say, for this context, when you create an instance of it, pass in these settings.
Okay, and then that could presumably come from an INI file or a JSON file or
Exactly.
anywhere else in this in the configuration subsystem.
Yeah. So at the moment in EF7, there's the ability to get rid of the connection string from here and pull that from the config file. If we just look at config.json. So you can see here this. I just left this here as an example. My app's not actually using it at the moment, but it's saying this is the connection string for this context for entity framework.
And don't you say like get value entity framework dot cycle sales context dot connection string?
You can do that, or by convention, EF will match these particular ones.
So it'll just pick it up automatically?
Yeah, the way it actually works, if you call the parameterless overload of this,
Yeah.
then use SQL Server is actually the thing that says, well, you're using me, you haven't specified anything, so let me look in config and see if.
And do you get a really cool error message with a blue button that says fix it?
No, you don't.
No? Okay. I'm just saying. Now that you've opened the door,
know,
I expect no less.
All right, so we're set up for MVC. Let's go look at a unit test quickly. So obviously for a unit test, I want to be hitting my actual database with my local data that I've been messing around with.
Right.
So we're going to kind of look at this in 2 steps. First up, I'm just going to uncomment this test.
And whose unit testing framework are you using here?
I'm using XUnit.
XUnit, okay. Because they've updated for .NET, ASP.NET.
Yeah, actually, if you look in here, I have xunit.krunner. So this is allowing me to...
Oh, let me see your project JSON, because we were talking about testing earlier.
Sorry, let me close that.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
Commands test.
Yeah, so I obviously have
Sure.
this pulls in XUnit, which gives me all the XUnit
that's
stuff
great.
too. And from the command, I'm going to use VS, but from the command, I could run ktest from here.
Absolutely lovely.
Okay, so at the moment, this thing, I've just set it up. It still uses SQL Server, it connects to SQL Express, but it's going to use a different database instance called test database.
Although I did notice in your project.json you had entity framework in memory also.
Now we're going to look at that in a second. You're spoiling it.
Sorry.
It's a teaser. So the way the test works, it creates an instance of the context. It basically resets the database, deletes it, and recreates it. This is basically designed for unit testing, where I don't want to mess around with migrations and stuff. Like, just create the database that matches my model for me. Add some stuff, save it. Then I have my actual test where I update the prices.
Right.
And then I query back for the data in a fresh context to make sure that stuff actually happened. Arguably not the best way to write this test, but it works. All right. So for our test explorer, I'll just run this test so everyone believes
And
it.
this is interesting, and if I understand correctly, because the project JSON has a command called test, that's how this got plugged in here, right?
I'm actually not sure if it's that or it's components in the xunit.krunner thing.
Some kind of magic, though.
Yeah, stuff happens.
I just think it's really nice, though, that you're in the Visual Studio Test Explorer.
Exactly.
The XUnit people don't have to write yet another GUI
Exactly.
for their tests. Everybody wins.
Yep. Okay, and if we go quickly look at our SQL Express instance and refresh here, you see there's a test database, and that was great. I could hook my test up to a different instance. Now, like you said, hitting an actual database is not necessarily ideal for our unit tests. So let's flick over. We'll delete the use SQL Server and replace it with a use in-memory store. And this is available because, like you said, in my project JSON, I have the entity framework.inmemory package installed. Now, because I've created an instance of my options, and I pass that same instance of the options to the 3 different instances of the context I use, so here, here, and then again at the bottom, it's going to use the same in-memory store for all 3 of those contexts, if that makes sense. So they're accessing the same instance of the in-memory store, but I could write another unit test and say use in-memory, and actually use a different instance of the in-memory store. So my tests are isolated.
Show me where it got set up again.
So I'm setting it up here.
In this one fact.
Yes. Now, obviously, I might want to share my in-memory store between tests.
I
Could
see.
if I wanted to.
Better to do it.
I want it scoped to my
No,
tests.
that's a valid point.
Yeah. But the nice thing here is I don't have to muck around with mocking anything. I also don't have to worry about how I hook things up. It's just kind of there. Now, obviously, if you had a complicated model, you might have to do a bit of config to say when targeting in memory, you might have to do some extra stuff to set it up. Obviously, like identity is not going to work.
Sure.
Do it this way. But all right, so let's just run our test again.
So there you're really testing your model.
Yeah, I'm testing. Hopefully, what I'm trying to test is both my model and the logic within my service that's using my model. Now, obviously, an in-memory store is never going to behave exactly the same as a relational database. In fact, no 2 relational databases behave exactly the same, so you still need to do functional testing. But this is kind of a cheap, easy way to write unit tests. Some people will argue, too, that using EF in the unit test is probably a bit too heavy as well, and that's fine. You don't have to, but this is easy.
Right, but if you have a bunch of logic in a controller around EF, and it pulls a bunch of things out of EF, thinks about it, puts stuff back in, brings it back out, then EF is part of the test.
Yep.
And in-memory way is a nice way to mock it out without mocking it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, are you going to mock out all the EF stuff?
Yeah,
or are you just which is difficult, or just have an in-memory database?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. We've got a couple of minutes left. Yeah, I'm going to quickly show you this one. So,
well, and also I want to hear how people can keep up on this, because are they going to get dailies, or where are they going to be watching? Because this is coming in, fast, and there's docs are being written as the code's being written.
Absolutely, yeah. So actually, I'm just going to mention the last demo. I won't actually go into it. What I was going to show, we'll spend a couple of minutes talking about that. I was going to show that you can now introduce properties effectively into your model without actually having them in your CLR class. So this is helpful if I want to introduce, say, a last updated property, which is part of my auditing information. And I want to be able to kind of reference that when I'm working with my context. So I might want to set it and save changes. But I don't want to actually expose it in my CLR class because it's not really part of my domain model. We've introduced the concept of shadow state so that I can add properties to my model, but that extra metadata is kind of stored in the change tracker, and it's not actually polluting, if you will, my CLR class.
What's an example of an obvious use for shadow?
So the demo I'm doing, the demo takes a few minutes, so we won't dig into it, but auditing information was the example I used. So I only care about setting the last updated and who updated stuff during save changes within the context. So that doesn't need to go and pollute my domain model, because I never show it in the UI. I never want to change it outside of the context of actually saving the changes.
You don't want to carry it around in every single model.
Exactly, yeah.
I see.
Yeah. But the nice thing is, by coding it as shadow state, I can still reason about it in a kind of strongly typed-ish way without having to drop down below EF and manipulate SQL commands before they hit the database.
Is that up on your blog as an example?
Yeah, so actually let's swap back to PowerPoint. And I've got some links here. So the bottom link here is the demo code that I just showed. So there's an example of it there. Yeah, if you went to my GitHub account too, for all the demos I've done recently, there's source code for all of those up there too. So you'd see examples of that and various other features as well. In terms of keeping up with this, if you just want to know more about EF7 and what EF7 is all about, the aka.ms/about EF7 is the place to go. That'll take you to a page on our GitHub site that has kind of EF7 in 100 words or less, and then links to relevant blog posts about some hot topics like what does it mean to only support code-based modeling. So we kind of dig into that in some detail. What does it mean to be part v7 and part v1? And we dig into that in some detail. All the ones where if you want to get passionate, go and read the blog comments on those. And then if you want to just follow along with what our team is doing, our GitHub repository is ASP.NET/Entity Framework. People are sometimes concerned about that or confused about the ASP.NET thing. And EF is not specific to ASP.NET, but we work very closely with ASP.NET because we just have the same development style. We like to be fairly lightweight. And we like to be open source and very transparent and all those things. So our team just naturally fits with ASP.NET. So
and who's your boss?
Scott Hunter, who...
There you go.
Straight from the horse's mouth. So yeah. So that would be the right place to go to. I don't have a link on the screen too, but if you want to kind of follow along with interesting stuff from our team, then our Twitter alias is EF Magic Unicorns.
As well it should be.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, this has been a lovely day here at the Microsoft Virtual Academy. Make sure, if you've only seen this one, you've missed a whole day of amazing content. Go back, watch it again, show your friends, show your mom. Everyone's going to love all of this stuff. My dad is watching, so I feel great. Thank you from everyone here. And make sure, answer the poll down here at the bottom of the screen. That's what the YouTube stars do.
All that
make sure
way.
to answer the poll. And we will see you again very, very soon. Thank you.